Practice video today. We're going to go from beginner to intermediate in CSS. So what we are going to be discussing will include CSS Box Model. We're going to talk about CSS Display Property. We're going to work on CSS Grid, CSS Flex Box. We're going to work on CSS Semantic ELEMENT, and we're going to work on two projects together. So let me just show you a project that we're going to replicate. One of the projects we're going to replicate. We're going to replicate this college website. We might just change ours to maybe a company website for copyright reasons, because I wouldn't want to just do exact thing as this. I would just do something else. So we're just going to replicate something similar, and we're going to work on another project that I would do towards the end of this session. And let's just get started into the video, right? So if you know that you're new to programming and you're looking for a roadmap to just get started, I am also new, and I'm starting and I'm taking this journey easy, trying to go from simple to complex. I've worked on HTML, I've worked on CSS introduction, and we currently are here, which is vanilla CSS, going from zero to intermediate. So you can go do well to watch my videos. I make my videos very simplified and explanatory, because I understand that with coding you want to actually understand what you're doing so that you can really be motivated to continue. Otherwise you can easily give up. So that's the purpose of me creating these practice videos, and also for me to be able to remember what I've learned, and also show you what I've learned, and probably help you to get better with your learnings. So let's just get started. I've already created a folder on my desktop. So this is the folder here called I've created a folder called CSS Intermediate. This is the folder, and I already opened it in my Visual Studio Code. So we are working on Visual Studio Code. For those who don't have Visual Studio Code, I want to show you how you can download Visual Studio Code. So all you need to do is go to your browser, right? So let me open my browser here, and just go to your browser and you can search for Visual Studio Code. So you can always download the Visual Studio Code from the very first web page that comes out on Google, and then you can always download it and install on your system. So I already downloaded mine, but I would drop the link where you can download the Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio Code is a free editor. You can use it for free. My previous video, I've been making use of Replit, so I decided to just lay my hands on Visual Studio, and it's really exciting to use. So you can always download it. I think I need to enlarge this so I can get to see the download button. Or so you can always download for Mac, for Windows, for whatever device you're using. So I already downloaded mine, and that's why I have it on my system. Yeah, and we're just going to get started with using our Visual Studio Code to get started. So we're working on CSS Box Model first. I have my theme here to be white. Usually I think I'm more comfortable with a white theme, and I changed that from my settings. I went to the theme, I went to the color theme, and I changed it to the light Visual Studio. And you can always leave it in the default Visual Studio, but I decided to change mine to the dark Visual Studio. I think I'm much more comfortable with that. So this is what I have. This is a light Visual Studio. So now that's all I can say concerning Visual Studio. Also, I downloaded an extension which we are going to make use of as we move forward in this course. So that extension is called Live Server. You can always come to the extension marketplace here and search for Live Server. I already have it downloaded, and you can install it on your Visual Studio. so that we can get started. So now let me go back to the folders. I already opened this folder in my desktop and I opened it with my Visual Studio. So I'm going to create a file and I'm going to name this file buttons.html, so we can get started with the CSS box model. We're talking about the margin, padding, and borders. So in order for us to explain this box model and have a good understanding of CSS box model, we are going to be using buttons like subscribe buttons, tweet buttons, just any button. So for now, I want to use subscribe button and some other buttons to explain this property and also show you how we can style buttons in CSS. So let's get our HTML syntax. To get the HTML syntax on Visual Studio, all you need to do is shift 1 then enter. So you have this CSS, you have this HTML syntax, and you don't need to have to type in your doc type, your HTML, your head, your body, and all of those, because with the shift 1 enter, you get this HTML syntax and we can get started. So I'm going to title this buttons. Now in CSS, everything in the head are things that you do not see. They are there to do their function, but you can't see them. Like now, this title is what you see in the browser, and all of these metal tags we have here is for the responsiveness of the web page according to screen size. So we have this in the head, and now for the part that users are going to see is going to be in the body. So since we're working on buttons, let's call up a button tag and let's say subscribe. Right? I would also love for us to style this within our HTML, so we might not necessarily have to go to create a separate CSS folder for it. So all we need to do is this: we call up a style, and we can always style our button inside this style tag. So since we are going to be making use of multiple buttons, I want to create a Twitter button, that is the tweet. So I want to create another button for enter. I'm going to give all of these buttons different classes, so I can call them with their class names. To open this on our browser, all you need to do is come here, copy part, and we can minimize this and paste it here. So you can see we have the subscribe, we have the tweet, and we have the enter button. So let's begin to style this. We have the class, which is the subscribe. Now don't forget we're working on the CSS box model, and that includes the margin, the padding, and the borders. So Traditionally, if we're not making use of the CSS box model, what we are going to do is to call up a height, and let's say we are giving this a height of 200 pixel. Let me refresh. Okay, that's one thing I want us to also know. If you observe, my code is not reflecting here, and that's because you should not make a mistake in your class. When you're naming your class, make sure it's identical whenever you're calling that class name. Otherwise, the code would not run. So if you observe here, I used a cap lock and I used a small letter here, so it's not going to run. All I'm going to do is change this to a small letter. Let it be exact. The class name you're calling should be the exact class name you have in your HTML. Now, okay, this height is too much. Let me just say a 100 pixel, and let me see, it's like half of this. Okay, and let me give you the width of 100 pixel as well. So if we are not using a box model, traditionally you might call up a height and you might call up a width for your button, but that is not that is not that's not the approach, or that's not the best way to style a button. That's the reason why we are making use of a CSS box model. So the appropriate thing for us to do is to use a padding around for the button. Now, padding is the space within the element, while margin is the space you give outside the element. So what we're going to do now is remove this width and height and give it a padding value instead. So we have padding left. We can give it a padding left of 10 pixels, and we can give it a padding right of 10 pixels as well. You can see that the space on the left and the space on the right of that subscribe button has changed, right? Compared to when we give it a width property, or that way it's not really going to be the best approach. So what we are going to do is we're giving this button a padding left, we're giving it a padding right. We can also give it a padding top, and we can give it a padding bottom. So we're going to give this a padding top of 30 pixel, and we're also going to give it a padding bottom of 30 pixel. Okay, so the button is coming up real good, but I think the 30 pixel top and bottom is too much. I'm just going to give it padding of 10 pixel around, and then we have this. Now the button looks like a real button. So what we can also do is to give it a margin. You can give this a margin right. You can give this a margin right of 30 pixel. That is, it's going to have a 30 pixel space on the right, on the outside of this element. You can see on the right. Then we can also give it a margin left of 30 pixels as well. And we can also decide to give it a margin top and a margin bottom of 10 pixels as well. So by doing this, it's going to give us a space on the outside of the element from the top, and it's also going to give us a space on the outside of the element from the bottom, right? So this is exactly what we mean by the box model. But that's not all. The box model also includes borders and the likes. Now we can decide to give our button a border, and we're definitely going to do that. But let us style this to look like a YouTube button. So what I want us to also do is to call up a background color. We call up a background color of red. Let me use the RGBA instead. So we have a red of 225, and we have a green of 0. Okay, I'm supposed to call up the RGBA. RGBA. So we can call up 225. RGBA is representing the red, green, blue, and the alpha, where the alpha is the opacity. So we have 0, 0, and we have the opacity of 0.9. Great. Now we can also give it a color. When we give it a color, the color here is going to be talking about the color of the text, that is the color of the subscribe, right? So we have a color. I want to give this a color of white. Now there's a border and we don't want that border. So for us to remove the border around the subscribe button, what we are going to do is to give it a border and say none. Call up a border and say none. That is, we don't want this black border you see here. We don't want it there. So we have a border of none and the border is out. So basically, I think this is what we can also do when it comes to styling a button. We can decide to also give it a font size, that is the size of the text in the button. We can decide to give it a defined size. So I'm going to give this a 30 pixel, and I'm going to, okay, now the button looks bigger, and because the font is bigger. So if you can observe, the button expands based on this font size. So for instance, now if I change this font size to be, let me say 20 pixel, the button is going to confront itself to a 20 pixel font, and the button is going to literally just expand or shrink based on the font size I give, compared to if we had a fixed height and a fixed width, and we gave it and we gave this button a font size, right, that is larger than the container. Then you can see that it's not going to be easy to style the button. So that's why it is better to use a padding and use a margin to style your button instead of using a height and a width. All right, so since we have this font size here, I'm just going to call up the tweet button because I want you to literally have an idea of what I'm talking about, why it's important for us to use this this box model. So I'm going to call up the tweet. I'm going to give this tweet a height. Let me say I want to give this tweet a height of 50 pixel. And I want to give it a width of let me say 100 pixel. Okay, so this is it. Now then I decide to give this a font size of 30 pixels. Okay, let me change this font size to 50 pixels. Wow, okay, so you can see that the font size of the text is bigger than the height and width we set for the button. So what happens is the font size of the text overflows beyond the height and width that we set, and that is because it does not resize itself according to the button, because we already set a fixed height and width size. So that is why it is important for us to use the box model of setting a padding and a margin value. So this is just the brief explanation for that. I'm just going to delete this and restyle our tweet button the way it should be. So since we have this, we can decide to also give our subscribe button a border radius. We can give this a border radius of 4 pixels. And we can also decide to give it a cursor pointer. That is, whenever we hover around it, let it change to a pointer instead of an arrow. So I think this already makes us really move from a regular way of styling to a professional way of styling a button. So we have all of these values given to our subscribe button. Now it's time for us to style our tweet button. So we can decide to style our tweet button by also giving it a background color, by giving it a padding, and working our way just like we did for the subscribe button. So I'm just going to speed this up without having to waste much of our time. I just want you to look at it as it's done. Now I want to set a padding, and I want to give it just a simple value of one value, right? So instead of me setting a padding left, padding right, padding top, padding bottom, I can just give it a padding of 10 pixels, and this would account for all the sides, that is on the left, on the right, on the top, and on the bottom. So I can give this a padding around of this value. So we have this, we can equally style our enter button, and we can move forward with this particular course. So let's just go back to style for transition, and let's work our way down to the top. So we have this style. So we want to be able to style this button. When we hover on this subscribe, we want it to change, we want some properties to change. We do not want it to be this way. So we can always come back to call up the class and give it a pseudo class of over. So we have dots, we have subscribe, and we have a colon, we have over. So doing this now, that is this property we want to add to this over, it's going to be effective when we over on the subscribe button. So we're going to give it a background color of white. And we're going to give it a color, that is the text color. We're going to give it RGBA of what we used earlier as the background color, and then we'll give it a border width. I think I need to refresh this so you can see. Now we need to give it a border width because you can't even see the white, right? So instead of saying border none, we can always give this a border width. And let me give this a border width of 2 pixels. I want to give it a border style so it can be visible. And we give this a border style of solid. Okay, so this is great. Now we have this. Another thing I want us to know is this. I don't want us to just over on it and it just gives us the value. So I can decide to add an opacity. So opacity is how let's say how transparent this object is. And opacity is usually on a scale of 0 to 1. So I'm going to give this an opacity of 0.8. You can see that it's a little bit blur. It's not so bright. So that's the purpose of the opacity. And another thing we should do is now we can also give it a transition. So how soon should my over effect property or attributes, how soon should they be visible? That's the reason why I wanted to give it a transition. So it should take about 1 second before my opacity reflects. So I can decide to call up opacity. I can call up so many properties in my transition. So I'm just going to only make use of the opacity and I want it to be at 1 second. So this is exactly what I mean. Now, going back to my tweet button, I'm also going to do the same. I'm going to change the font size of this to 20 so that it can match what we have in the subscribe button. So this is it, and I'm also going to give this a border radius because Twitter button is not pointy like that. It has a border radius. So I'm just going to give this a border radius of, let me say, 20 pixel for a start, and if it doesn't work, we can decide to change. We can decide to increase the size. So I'm going to change this to 20 pixel and let's see. Okay, this is a little bit nice. And so let's style this button when we over on it. I'm not so comfortable with this background color, so I can click on this and I can decide to tweak it to fit. Okay, no, this color is not close to it. So you can decide to use the color picker here instead of giving your own value, and just select a color that probably fits into the brand color you're looking at. And so I think this should work, although this is not, it's a little bit faint. Okay, I think this might be better, although some over properties. So we have call up the class, which is the dot tweet, a semicolon over. So the property I want us to just put for this tweet button should be a shadow. So we call up a box shadow. In order for me to explain the box shadow properly, I'm just going to do this and I would explain afterwards. Okay, so we have this box shadow. This 0 here is representing the shadow on the horizontal axis. The second 0 here is representing the 0 on the vertical axis, while this third 0 here is representing the I think should be the opacity. So I'm just going to change this to 10, and then you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see the shadow on the horizontal. Then I'm also going to change this to 10, and you can see the shadow also comes when I over it, both on the horizontal and on the vertical. And I'm also going to give this 10 as well, so we can see that it's the opacity, that is how transparent it is. Now that this is it, so I'm just going to change the color here to something maybe gray, something not as dark as this. So I'm just going to leave the color, but I will change the opacity of the color to like 0.15, and we can have a very good button with a light shadow. So we have this, and this is done. Now let us style our enter button, and let's just get started. Let's get done with this CSS box model and move to the next. So for the enter, we just call up the class, which is the dot enter, just like we've done for the rest. I want to give the color. I want to give it aqua. I want to give it a background color. I want to give it blue. I want to give it a padding. I want to give it 10 pixels. I want to give it a font size. I want to give it 20. I want to give this a border radius of let me say 5 pixels, and let me refresh this, and we have this. So I can see that it has a border, and I want to remove that border, so I say border and I give it none. So I also want it to have a pointer when I hover around it, so I want to give it a cursor. I want to give this a cursor pointer of pointer. So we have this, and now this button looks better. So I can also style this when I decide to hover around it. So all I need to do is call up the enter and give it a pseudo class of over, and then I can decide to change the color as well. I want the color now to be this, and I want the background color to be white. And I want it to have a border, so it can be visible. I'll give it a border of 2 pixels. I also want it to have a border style, so it can be visible. Solid. And now when I hover around this, okay, I'm going to change this color to blue. I think blue is much more visible. So when I hover around this, I have this, and now this is better. Another thing is I can decide to give this a transition, just like I did for this. So I can decide to give this a transition as well, and I want the box shadow to be the transition property I'm giving it. So I'm giving this a box shadow. And I want it to be 0.15 seconds, and this is it. Another thing we can also give is a active property. So for instance, I can also call up my tweet button and give it active. So whenever it's clicked on, the active property I set activates. So I can just decide to give it an opacity. I give it an opacity of let me say 0.7. So whenever it is clicked on, the opacity changes. So these are the properties that we can give to buttons, and I'm just going to attach this folder in the description so you can have a full access to this. Now to explain the CSS display property. Now CSS display property it explains, or it shows us how our elements rather are displayed on a screen. Now we have 3 types of the display property. We have the block element, we have the inline block element, and we have the inline element. Block elements are elements that takes up the entire space on the line, while the inline block elements are elements that only take up the space that they need on the line, and inline elements are elements that apply in a line of text. Now these buttons we have here, they are all inline block elements because they only take up the space they need. Look at it now. We have button class here, we have subscribe, we have another button class here of tweet, we have the other one of enter. So each of these buttons, right, subscribe takes its own space, On the same line, tweet button also takes its own space on the same line. The enter button also takes the same space. It takes its own space on the same line. So if we keep adding more buttons, they keep taking the space they need on the line, and if the line is it's finished, it goes to the next line. That is, it only takes the space it needs. That's an inline block element, while a block element takes the entire space on the line. And examples of block elements will include things like paragraph, like heading, like divs are naturally block element. They take up the entire space on the line. So you can decide to change an element to the display block or to display inline block. Now I can just call up this my subscribe. Now I call up the class, which is the dot subscribe, and I tells it to display a block. Remember, it is currently an inline block because buttons are usually inline block. So I want it to display a block that is take up the entire space on the line. So by doing this, if I refresh, you see it takes up the entire space on the line. I can decide to also give it a margin button so that you can see this clearly. And don't forget, margin is the space you give on the outside of the element. So by giving this a margin button, you can see that it takes up the entire space on the line. Now I can decide that originally it's a block element, it's an inline block element, so I can decide to change it to a block element. And elements, like I said, paragraphs, if I call up a paragraph here and say my name is Amoke, I would observe that my name is Amoke is going to literally take up a line. So even if I come with another heading here and I say H2, and I say I am learning how to code, right? So if I refresh this, you see that my H2 takes up a separate line, and that's because they are originally display block element. So usually you can decide to call up the H2, you can decide to call up the paragraph and tell it to take up inline block, that is, take up only the space you need on a line. So basically this is exactly what the display property in CSS is. CTA Grid and CSS Flex Box. Before then, I just want to give you a brief explanation for you to see what CSS Grid and CSS Flex Box is like. So CSS Grid versus Flex Box. Flex Box is a one-directional or let me say one dimension. It just gives us in one dimension. We can only arrange either in a row or in a column. But with grid, you could arrange both in rows and in columns. That's just the difference between CSS Grid and CSS Flexbox. So how do we apply CSS Grid and CSS Flexbox in practice? Note, for you to want to display anything in CSS as a grid or as a flexbox, it has to be in a div. A div is a container. So for instance, you want to put a card, you want to arrange a card in rows and column. Those cards or the content of those cards all have to be in a div. If you also want to arrange it as a flex box, maybe you want it in one direction, either as a row or a column, it has to be in a div. So to begin with, we call up a div. Let's call this div1, and let's give it a class. Div1. Let's call up another div. Let's have about 6 divs so we can arrange in grids and also use it to explain our flex box. Let's call this div2 and let's give it a class. So we can style this individually. For this, we want to call up div 1. I'm going to give it a width. Let's give it a width of 100 pixel and a height of 100 pixel. Let's give it a background color of blue. So this is good. I also want to add a break here, so it can begin on or I just go add a margin button. So I'm going to copy this style I have here for div 1. I'll replicate it for div 2, div 3, down to div 6. I would only change the color. So I'm just going to copy. Now we have div 1, div 2, div 3 down to div 5. So we want to display all of this as a grid. To do that, we are going to put everything inside another div. That's the way it is done. So we call up another div here, close this, and copy, because we want to put it in a container. So we put this, all of them, inside a div. And we'll call this, we give this a class. Let's call it practice. So to style this, we call up our class. We call up a display, and we say we want it to be a grid. Now nothing changes until we add another property called grid template colon. So this grid template colon is literally, we're telling the system that we want it to be 3 colon, or we want it to be 2 colon, depending on the number of colon we want. So what we want is this: we're going to set a value, and that value is going to determine the size, or better still, the width of the colon. So I want this to be 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel. Right? So what happens is, whenever you call up a grid, you need to put a property called grid template colon. So using this grid template colon at 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel is each, tells it to arrange that div, all of the div in this our practice, as a grid. So we have it 100 pixel. This is column 1, column 2, column 3, right? So we have div 1, 2, 3. This is column 1, column 2, column 3. So that is 100 pixel on each column. So for instance, now I change this to just 100 pixel 2 column, and I refresh. I have just 2 column, 1, 2, and they're having a width of 100 pixel. So that's how you do. That is exactly how you display a div as a grid. So, but I want this to be a 3 column, so I'm just going to add another 100 pixel. Afterwards, I can also determine the amount of rows I want. So I call up another property called the grid template row. So for my grid template row, I want it to have just 2 rows, and those 2 rows should have 100 pixel each. So we have 2 rows, 1, 2, and 3 column. So basically, this is exactly what grid is in CSS. Another thing I want us to notice this, because I already set a precise width and a precise height to this my div, this particular dimensions I put is going to override the dimensions I put in my grid template column. Let me give you an instance. If I change this to 200, you're going to see that there's going to be a little bit of disparity in it, right? Because I already set a width of 100 pixel. So this particular, each of these divs are conforming to the size I already set, which is 100 pixel, because this size is a particular, this property is particular to each of those individual div, and it would override this instead of the value I put in my grid template column. It's going to override that. So basically, that's what this particular CSS grid is talking about. The width and the height for each of these divs, and you can see that it's going to take up the value of 200 pixel for each. So I'm just going to comment all of this out. And then we can refresh. So we can see that, okay, for the last one of them is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we need to comment this out as well. So we can see that it's now taking the exact value we set, because we already removed the value for the individual div. So what we can do also is, instead of using 100 pixel each, we can also do something called using 1FR. This FR means space. That is, let it take up the rest of the space, right? And it should be arranged equally. So 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. That is one free space each, taking the entire width of the screen. Now I'm going to refresh this, and we can see that this is exactly what applies. So we can also do the same for our grid template column, and we can determine the values we want to put for each of these individual, for each of the sizes of the individual rows. So I have 1FR as well, and I'm sure it's going to literally be the same as well. So you can see that it has taken the space 1FR, that is, take free space for the column and for the grid. So in order to make this beautiful, I'm just going to go back to set my sizes, and I'll leave this at 200 pixel, 200 pixel, 200 pixel. I'll also leave this at 100 pixel, 100 pixel. So basically, this is exactly what CSS Grid is. What I want you to notice is that with CSS Grid, you need to put all the cards in a div, and you put all of them inside a parent container, which has to be a div. So you call up the parent class and you style the parent class. as a grid. So that's exactly what CSS Grid is all about. It's equally similar to CSS Flex. So for Flex now, we are going to just leave this, or better still, I'm going to delete this, or I'm just going to keep this, and I will just write I'm going to write more codes, and I'll use that to explain what a CSS display flex is. So I'm just going to put a margin bottom here of 100 pixel, and then I call up more divs. I create another div and a parent div, so we can talk about our CSS display flex. So let's call up a div. Okay, so this is not going to show because we didn't give any text or any number inside it. So what I'm just going to do is I'll put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So once this is done, I go back to my CSS and I style this. In order for us to style it, don't forget we have to put it inside another div, a parent div. So we have div and we have a closing tag. So you copy out the closing tag and put directly under this. So I give this a class name of flex box. Once this is done, we can now go to call up our class here and we can style it how we please. So coming to flex, to the styling, we call up the parent here, which is flex box, and we give it a display of flex. Now the thing about displaying an item as a flex is that with Flexbox, the only property we can give is a flex direction, because remember I said it's a one directional way of displaying items or cards or containers or on a screen. So it's a one-dimensional layout basically. So we can't really give values in terms of the size of the column or the size of the row because it's just one dimension. And with flex, the default direction for a flex is a row. So you can now decide to put it as a column or how you want it. But the moment you call up a display and you give it a value or you give it a property of flex, it's automatically going to be arranged on a row. So in order for this to be visible on our screen, we need to give each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 divs, we need to give them a confined value for the width and the height and also the background color. I'm just going to copy out what we have here and I will edit it for the rest. We have our first to be flex 1, so I'll change this here to be flex 1, and I'm going to use a color of blue. So I copy this again and I'll repeat in 5 places. So this is done, then I can refresh. So we can see that this is displayed as a row. So we can see it's just a single row. And I said that this row is the default. So we can change this direction to a colon and we'll have it displayed as a colon. So we can have this and it's displayed as a colon. You can also decide to change it as a colon reverse. So however you want to have it displayed, that's when we use the flex box. So you can see it's reversed. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in ascending order. And if it was just colon, we have it just like this. And that's what display flex and display grid is all about in CSS. Another challenge I want us to take is this. I saw this on social media, which is the Microsoft logo. So Microsoft logo, I want us to display this logo, or I want us to design this logo using a CSS Grid. So we'll come here and we're going to design this using CSS Grid. So go back to our work, and this flex 6, I want it to have a margin so we can have some space at the bottom first in order for us to get our work done. So this is done this way. Now to do that, I come here, I call up a div just like we've been doing earlier. What are the colors we have in Microsoft logo? We have the red, we have green, we have blue and yellow. So I'm going to call up separate classes for the red, I'm going to call up another class for the green, once this is done, we put it in another div, which is going to be a container. And we give this a class, we call it Microsoft logo. Once this is done, we go back to our style sheet we have above here, and we call up the Microsoft. Once we've done that, we can decide to give it the display grid. But before then, we need to be able to set colors for each of these classes, and we've not done that yet. So I'm going to delete this and set those colors. I'll call up the red class, and I'm going to give it a background. Now Microsoft logo color code. So for the red, we have FF25002. F25022. Okay, we have green. Seven FBA00. We call up the third one, which is blue, then yellow. So we have blue. I'll give it a color. 00A4EF. And last but not the least, we have the yellow. FFB900. So doing this, we can now display it as a grid. So we'll call up the container, which is Microsoft. And we give it a display of grid. We give it a grid template colon of 200 pixel, 200 pixel. And we give it a row, the grid template row of 100 pixel, 100 pixel. So we can refresh this. Now, this is similar to what we have here, except that we need to add some space. So to add some space in our grid, we can call up grid, or we can call up grid colon and just say we want a grid gap rather. So we can call up a grid gap and say we want a grid gap of 12 pixels. So this would give us 12 pixels for both the rows and the column. Or we can decide that we want a grid, we want a row gap of 12 pixels, and we want a column gap of 12 pixels. I can delete this. It's going to be the same thing. And this is it. So we've been able to design this Microsoft logo just like we have it here. And this is what display, flex, and display grid is all about in CSS. Thank you for this project, and it's time for us to work on the project. To do that, we're going to create a file here. We're going to call this website.html. Then we're going to create another one for our CSS, and we'll also call this website.css. So since we have this done already, next thing for us to do is to begin working on our project. So what do? We're already in the website.html, so don't forget to shift 1 enter so we can have this, and let's call this company website. So since we have this already done, let's link our CSS, and we'll call up the link tag, and we have a rel, which is a style sheet, and we have the href, which is website.css. So we have this done already. Now we can begin to start to work. So the rule is for us to write our HTML and style it with the CSS. I mean, we write the HTML, then we style immediately before we move to the next phase. So this is what we're trying to replicate. We're trying to do something like this. And before we move forward, I want to show you how we can be able to copy font size from Google Fonts and how we can be able to use that in our work. So what we can do is come to fonts.google, and you can just decide to use Google Fonts rather than the default font that is in our HTML and CSS. So what we need to do is I already had this 400 and regular Roboto selected. So I'm just going to copy this and I'll put it in my head tag of my HTML. So once I'm done, I'm just going to paste. Another thing is that if you observe, we have some icons that are used in this project, like this kind of icons. And in order for us to use those icons, we're going to go to a site called awesome icons, or let me look for awesome icons. I'm not really sure if that's the name, or font awesome icons. Perfect. So we're going to use icons from this, and in order for us to link this, we have to copy a code to put in our header. So I'm just going to look for where to get that code from. So how to link icons in HTML. So I'm just going to come to this icon tutorial. Since we're using the version 4, so I'm just going to look for, I'm sure there should be a way I can get that from this website, but I wasn't able to, or I don't think I decided to go through this route. I just went directly to Google and I found this information concerning icons, and I just copied out font awesome for icons. So I'm just going to copy this and put in my the head tag in my HTML so that I can be able to use those icons. So I come here and I can as well put it here so we can get started with this project. So now that we have that done, we are going to go to our project. Now I also want to talk about something called the CSS semantic element, because we are going to be making use of those CSS semantic elements rather than using div tags. We can be able to call up our semantic element by using things like sessions, like filters, like using things like headers, and those are semantic elements. Apparently semantic elements are basically, it makes people to be able to read our code, and it makes the I think system as well to be able to read our code. So basically I'm just going to type it out so that we can just have a picture of what we mean by semantic elements. These are best practices. Semantic elements are those that clearly describe their meaning in human and machine readable way. So we can have, for a session, we can use a header tag to begin it. We can use a navigation tag to begin. We can use session, articles, and footers. So basically these are what semantic elements are, and it's important to use this rather than just using div. It makes the system understand that, okay, this is what we are trying to, or this is what this particular part of the page is talking about. And I think this came from the HTML5, latest HTML5 syntax. That's where we got the use of these headers, navigation, footers, and the likes. So we can now begin our project. We have this body, and I want us to go to this website and just look at what we have. So we have a logo, we have a navigation menu, we have a background image, right? So we come to our body here and we call up a header, because remember I said I want us to use semantic elements to work on this project rather than using div and calling up classes and the likes. So since I have a header, the very first thing I'm going to now call up my navigation, which is also my nav, because we are going to be having our navigation bar like the logo and this blog and call and contact and the likes. So in my navigation bar, I'm now going to call up a div. So in my first div, I will use for our logo, I think I would want to use something like, so I call up a class for this particular div because we're working on the logo. So I call up a class here and I call this logo, and then I want to change the name to I just trying to think of a name. I'm just going to call it to name of Awesome Industries. So I'm just going to put the name here, and I'm going to use an H1 tag for that, an header one. So I'm going to call this Awesome Industries, basically, right? So I think that's the name I can come up with right now. So since we have the Awesome Industries, and this is what we have here. So what I'm going to do is, since I also want the color here for the awesome to be different from the color of the industry, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a span in between this, and I'm going to just, so that I can be able to edit that separately. So I have a span, then I copy my awesome and I put inside my span. So I have this done already. Then I can always open this on live server and see it in real time what we're doing. So we have Awesome Industries. So I'm just going to delete this, and we have that already. So what we're going to do next is our list. Now since we have that, the next thing for us to do in our navigation is for the list, where we have the home, we have the about, we have every other thing that is there. So what I'm going to do is I will call up an unordered list, or you can also call up an ordered list anyhow you want it, but I'll call up a UL, and in between that UL I'll call up li, remember. So since it's going to be an anchor link, in the sense that they are going to be clickable and they will move from one page to another, so what I'm going to do is now I'll call up an anchor tag and I'll call up href. For now we're not linking anywhere because we've not created all of those pages yet. So what we're going to do is this: we are just going to, in between our anchor tag, we're going to call up the href, and we're going to put the name right in the middle. So we have here to be home, and we have here to be href. For now it's going to be blank, so we can just represent that using a hash. So we do the same, or you can copy this out and do it in multiple places. So we have this, paste, so we have the home, we have the about, we have the courses, we have the blog, and we have the contact. So we can refresh this and see what we have. So now this is looking good. What we need to do next is to style our navigation bar, that is, we style our heading. So this is what we have now. We can now begin to style this, and what we are going to do next is to come to our CSS and begin to style what we are going to be working on. So the very first thing is to come here to my CSS, and we're going to call up a universal selector, and that universal selector is using the star. So once you call up a star space, then you have your curly braces. So we want all of our margin for all. This universal selector is going to work on all the HTML entity on the page. So we have everything to be 0 pixel. We also want to set our padding to be 0 pixel. Once we're done with that, it's time for us to style our header. So what we have here is this. Let me go back to our HTML. What we have here is this. We have the navigation menu, then we have the class. So for me now, I want to be able to style the header, that is everything within this header. I want to style it because if you can see what we have here, we have a background image, and we have some other things in the header. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up the header. Since it's a tag, it is not a class, so I'm just going to call up the header directly, and I want it to have a minimum height of 100. I want it to have a width. I want to set a confined width of 100%. I want it to have a background image. Now this background image, remember, we always use a URL to call up an image in CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a bracket here because our image has a gradient, right? So I'm just going to call up the linear I'm going to call up the linear gradient. So we've been able to add the image, and this is what we have here because we added a linear gradient. So to add a linear gradient, just to bottom or to top or wherever you want to add it to, then comma. Make sure there's a comma, otherwise it won't reflect. So to bottom, then comma, then the RGB color, then we have the URL. So I added the position, relative, background position, center, then background size, and we have this is done. So afterwards, I'm now going to style the logo. So if you see my logo, I have my awesome industries. So I come here, I call up that logo class, logo. Then I have this here. I have the color. I want the color to be white, and then I want the font size. I want the font size to be 30 pixels, and I want the font width to be 700. Okay, this is my universal tag. I want to add a font family. Since I used Roboto, I copied the Roboto from Google Fonts. So I want everything to be Roboto. Or yeah, I want Roboto. So this is fine. So since I have this in my logo, so we have it to be this, then I can go back, and I can go back to call up the span, which is the awesome industries. I'm just going to change this to 20. I think it's too large. Okay, so we have this, and then I'm going to come back to call up my span, and I want to have the color of my span to change. So I'm just going to call up the color, and I will have here to be orange. So this is it. Okay, this is great. Now it's time for us to style our list. So to style the list, all you need to do is to call up the navigation menu, because that is exactly where we want everything to be displayed flex. So we have nav, call up this nav, and I go to the display, and I give it the display flex, give it a padding of 2%, and I give it another padding here of 6%. So what this is that the 2% is for the top and bottom, while the 6% is for the left and right. So with this now, I can justify it, my content. Okay, there's something wrong with the padding. I'm just going to write that again. Select this. I also want 6%. I'll select this. Then I want to justify content, and I want it to be justified on the center, because that's the best position for it. So let me just refresh this, and everything is on the center. So what I'm going to do next is to now individually style my list item. So I call my li, and okay, this my justified content should be space between, not everything should be centered. So I'll give this a space between, and I will align item on the center. I think this is better, yes. So since I've done that, now for my list item, I want to remove the decoration of the bullet points. So what I'm going to do is list style, and I want it to be none. Okay, the decoration is out. If you can see, the decoration is out. Then I also want to have my display to be inline block, so that they can take up only the space that they need on the line. Okay, so that is that. Then I also want to add my position to be relative. And I'm also going to add a padding. Now don't forget, for the padding I can just have two values, where this 8 pixel will represent the one for the top and bottom, while the 12 pixel that I want to add now will represent the one for the left and right. So this is it. So we can see that everything is set. I'm now going to go to the anchor tag, because the anchor tag is exactly where we have the home, about, courses, and everything. So the reason why I'm putting the li before the anchor tag is because there might be other anchor tags I'm going to use during the course of this project, but I want this particular style to be effective on the anchor tag in the list item in the header. So that's why I had to call the li before the anchor tag. So I want the color now to be white, and I want the text decoration to be none. So what I mean by text decoration, that is the underline will be out. So I want this to be none. And we have this, which is equally good. It's a good enough decoration. So this is it. Now let's check this. We have this learn at the most prestigious college, whatever, inside our header. So what we are going to do is we go back to our HTML. Since it's in our header, we're also going to create a div for that. I will call this, give this a class, and I'll call this a text box. So since I have this already, the next thing for me to do is to add the H1. So my H1 here is, let me say, learn at the most prestigious, and we're talking about industries. So I'm just going to change this to work at the most prestigious, and work at the best, work at the best industry after college. So since we have this, let me see what we have. Work at the best industry after college. Okay. We're also going to go back to put another paragraph because we have a paragraph there, and sincerely I don't even know how to coin out words right now, so I'm just going to use Lorem to get some paragraphs. So since we have Lorem here, and I can style this Lorem, and I'm just going to break this, and okay, this is okay. So since we have this, put another enter here. So I don't think this is bad. Let's see what we have. Okay, let's add the break instead of, let's add a lot of breaks there, and probably delete some of the text. So we have another break, here. So let's see what we have. Okay, it's not bad. So since we've written that, the next thing for us to do is to style it, and we've added that. So if we look at the design here, outside the text box there is also a button here. So what we are going to do is put that button, I'm just going to come down to this place and add the button. So instead of adding a button, we can always use an anchor tag because I believe that button leads somewhere. So I'm just going to use an anchor tag instead, but you can also use a button. I'm going to give this a class of button. I'll call this visitors. So I'm going to add a class to this. I'll call this button. So since we have this, all that we're going to do is, it has to link somewhere, but since we don't have a place that we're linking to for now, let's put an hash here. And so we can always look at what we have. We have the visitors, right? So now let's style this. Since we are done styling, we have all the information on our header already. So let's go to our CSS and let's work on this together. Now, what we're going to do next is this. We have to style this text box that we've created. So in our CSS, we're going to call up that text box. So we're going to have this dot text, then box. So we have color for the text. It has to be white so it can be readable. Perfect. So since we have the color has been given to be white, then we should now also have the text align. I want it to be centered. Then I'm also going to add a position here. The reason why I'm adding a position is so that it can be far away from where this is. So I want to add a position to be absolute, and I'm going to give it a top of 50% from the entire header. So we're going to give it a stop of 50%. And then I'm going to give it a left of 50% as well. Okay. Then I'm going to confine the width. Okay, I need it to be at the center because this is far away from what I thought. So I'm going to give it another property called transform. And I want it to be translate. And I want it to be minus 50%, comma, minus 50%. So it's going to stay directly in the center. So I want it to have a confined width of 90%. Okay, so this is good. Which is the next thing to do? Since we've done that, all we're just going to do is go back to our CSS, and for us to style this button, I think it's best for us to work on, okay, we can call up the class, which is button, and we can also style the H1 and the paragraph as well. So let's just take it in ascending order. Let's style the H1, we style the paragraph, then we can style the button. So we'll come to our CSS, and we'll call up our text box dot text box H1. So what do we need to style here? Basically, maybe we can style the font size. Let me try 30 pixels, and let's see what we have. Okay, let me increase it to 40. Okay, this is better. I would also want to style the paragraph. I do the same thing. Dot text box, I call up P. So for the paragraph, I want to also style the font size and style the margin. So I will just style the font size, and I'll call this 20 pixels. Okay. And I also style the margin here, and I give it a margin of 10 pixels, which will represent from the top because there needs to be some space, and I'm also going to give it from left 0 and right, and I also want to give it a 40 pixel from the bottom. So let me just give this 40 pixel. So this no, we're going to add a 0 here. Okay, so what this means is I gave it a 10 pixel from the top, and I give it a 0 pixel for left and right, and I give it a 40 pixel from bottom. So that's it. Now it's time for us to style the button. That's the visitors. So what I can do here is I go back to my HTML. In my HTML, I have a class which is button. So I'm going to call up that class that contains the visitors, and I will style it. So dot button, and I'm going to just do text decoration none. And then I also want to give it a color because that color is not visible. So I'm going to give it a color of white. And then I go to the next thing by giving it a border so that it can be visible. So I want to give it a border, and I want it to be solid. And then I want it to have a a border width as well as a border color. We've added the border style, which is solid. Then we can decide to add the border width. We can decide to add the border width of 2 pixels, and then we also add a border color of white. But then we can always shorten this. Instead of doing it this way, we can always shorten this and just add border solid. Instead of adding border solid, border width, border color, we can just do this by adding 1 pixel, then white. So the system already just understands what this is instead of writing everything the same. So you can see it's still the same. Now we've been able to add the border. Now it's time for us to add a padding. So we need to add a padding to give it space. So what we're going to do is add a padding 12 pixel for top and bottom. And we're going to add a 34 pixel now for left and right. So let's see what we have. Now the button looks exactly as the one that we had in this other website. So now this is done. We've been able to add every other thing like the padding, and we want to make it to have a cursor pointer because it's very important as well. So we want to make this cursor to be pointer, and I think this is enough for now. But the thing is, when we hover around this button, we want it to have that effect. So what we're going to do is come back here, call up the same button, and let's put a hover here. So when we hover around it, this is what we are going to have. So we can have a border, same thing as 1 pixel. We want it to be solid, and we want it to have this color. So since we have this, so we can see that. And another thing we also need to add is a background. We want to have a background. Let's say have that same background. I think this is better. This is really similar to what we have. So this is good. Let's compare it to this. So I think we have something close to what they have. I think for now. So we can just really work on that. And I'm trying to look at the button. I'm seeing that it seems like they have a little bit of opacity and transition instead of this just going straight into it. So I'm going to come back to our HTML. So when we hover around it, we want it to have an opacity of, let's give it 0.6, and let's have a transition of 0.15s. So I think this is kind of similar to what is here. So you can always just play around it, give it your opacity, just do whatever you want to do. So since we've done this, we've been able to finish up with that. Now let's go to the next part of the website. So we have these courses we offer, intermediate, degree, and postgraduate. So what I'm just going to do is go back to my HTML, and we can get started with that for the courses. So we're not going to use courses, so I'm really thinking of what I can use to replicate courses on our own end. So what I'm just going to say is, instead of courses, I'm going to I really do not know, since we're working on industries, so I just want to give it like engineering and some other things like that. So let's just work on giving it any text we want to do. So let me call it discipline, right? I think discipline would be nice. So we have discipline. Discipline we accept, and we give that lorem ipsum. So since we've done this header, we're done with the header. We've finished up with the header, and we're looking at another section. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to call up a new section here. And in this section here, I'm going to give it a class. And I'll call it discipline. So since I've called this class discipline, all I'm going to do is now put my h1. So I have my h1, and I'm going to call it discipline we accept. So since we have this h1 here, I'm looking at the fact that there's also a paragraph. So for this paragraph, I'm also going to use the lorem ipsum, since I also do not know what to write, and I'm going to I don't want it to be so long, so I'm just going to cut out some part of this lorem ipsum. Let me just cut it up to this place, and I think this is fair. So what I'm going to do next is work on styling this before I go to the intermediate and the likes. I think it's best for me to do it that way. So what I'm going to do now is to go to my CSS, and when I get to my CSS, I'm going to call up my courses, since I have this particular session here called discipline. I named mine discipline instead of courses, so I'm going to call dot discipline. That's the entire session. Look at it, opening tag of the session and closing tag, and we gave it a name of discipline. So I'm going to call this discipline here, dot discipline, and I'm going to give it a text align, so everything is going to be aligned on the center as well. I'm going to give it a width, just like what I did for the previous one. I'm going to give it a width of 80%. The reason why I'm giving it a width of 80% is so that we can have space, right? So that everything that is going to be within the session is going to be confined to an 80% of the screen, right? So I have this to be 80%. Another thing I will do is to give it a margin. Let it be auto. Then a padding top of 100 pixel. So once this is done, I'm giving this a padding top of 100 pixel. It's going to have a little bit of space from here to here. That's what that means. So we have this, and this is done. So it's now time for us to work on styling the other part of this document, or of this landing page. So it's immediate degree. So I'll just name mine engineering, science, and I think I had to come up with something, but for now I really cannot think of anything. So I need to go back to my HTML to put this. So for me to do that in my HTML, I'm just going to call up another div and put everything in that div. So I'm going to call up this div. It's my HTML here. I'm going to call up this div here. And I'll give this div a class. I'll call this class discipline role. And I can now start to put things I want to put inside it. So the next thing for me to do is to now create this individual boxes, or this individual here like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to put it in a div, because it contains an header and a paragraph. So I'm also going to put it in a div, and I'm going to call that div here discipline colon. I'll call up a class, and I say discipline and I say colon. So inside it, I now have my h3, and for my h3 here, I'll call this engineering, put a paragraph here, and I'll use the same Lorem Ipsum. So with this now, I'm just going to break more of this so it can be going to break this here, put this back here. Okay, so this is better. Now, so this is what I have for engineering. Remember, these are different. So 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to just duplicate this particular div here. I'll copy this and I'll duplicate it here, paste it here, and I'll duplicate it here again, and I'll paste it here. So, but I will change this from engineering to science, and I'll change this to business. So let's see what we have. It might not really be nice, but it's closer to where we are going to. So what I'm going to do next is to now style this in my CSS. I think since it's already showing here, so the next thing is for me to style it with my CSS. Now when I go to my CSS, I'm going to call up the very first class, which is discipline.colon, and I style this, which will be the same thing for everything. So what I do is to call up the class, which is discipline info. So with this now, I can now give this some styling. So let's start with this. I want it to be just 31% because I'm still going to put everything in a display of flex. That is why I'm calling the flex spaces. But even before calling this flex spaces, let me just put everything in a flex. So I call up the particular HTML here that has the discipline row. So I'm going to give this dot discipline row. So, and I'm going to give this a display, and I want it to be flex. The default direction for flex is a row, so I don't need to put that flex direction to be row. I'm going to add a magenta and the 5%, and I'm going to justify it to be space between. So this is exactly how it turns out to be. So now I want to now style this individual column. So I've given it this flex basis. Okay, let me just comment this out so that we're going to see that even without that flex basis of 31%, it's still going to be arranged like this because we've told it to be flex, though we didn't specify the width of the flex, but it's going to be evenly spaced. But regardless, I can now continue. I can still give it a flex basis or not. It's not so important. I'm going to add a background, and I want it to be like a cream color. So I want it to be so let's see what we have. Okay, this is looking good. Now it's time for me to, since we've added the background color, I think I need to add the flex basis here. So it can be individual. Okay, now this is good. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to add the border radius, and I'll add a padding. So I'll add a border radius of 10 pixels, and I want it to have a padding of 20 pixel to the left and right, and I want it to have 12 pixel to the top and bottom. So we have this. Now once we've added that, I want to be boxed, and I want it to be border box. So this is okay. Now the next thing is to add I think this is it. So I can see that it's looking exactly like what we have here, except that it has a little bit of like a box. I don't know what's the exact word to use. It has like a box shadow. You can see it has like a shadow. So I'm going to add a shadow to this, and aside that it has a shadow, it's only when I click on it that shadow is effective. So it's only when I click on this particular thing that the shadow is effective. So I'm going to come to this particular, I'll call up this discipline core, and I want to add a hover on it, rather not when I click, I want to add a hover. So it's when I hover on it, and what I'm going to do is this, I'll give it a box shadow. So whenever I hover on it, it gives me that. I'll put this to be 0 pixel, 20 pixel, and I want to have the RGBA. I want to have RGBA of 00, and just faint opacity so it can be extremely light. 0, and I want this to be 0.2. Okay, good. I think it's looking like it has it now. So once I'm done with that, I think that's the only thing it has, except that there's a transition. So I'm going to come back to this discipline colon, and I'm going to add a transition of 0.5 seconds. So it takes 0.5 seconds before the shadow is effective, just exactly as we have it here. Now this is looking good, except that we need to add margin to the header so that there can be some space. So I'm also going to call up the same thing here, and I'm going to go back to this place, to the HTML, and I used H3 for everything, for science, for engineering. I can as well just call up my H3 directly, but I don't know if I'm still going to use any other H3 in this project. So I'm going to say H3, and for my H3 I want the font size. I just want the font, I want it to be bold, which could also be the font weight. I want the font weight to be 600, and I also want the text align to be centered, which is center, and I also want to have a margin, especially a margin button. Sorry for this. So I'm just going to add a margin to this, so you can give me a margin around it. And let me say 10 pixel. Let's see what we have. So this margin here, don't forget, this is for the top. So I add a margin to the top and bottom. And for the, okay, so I think this is enough. This is enough for now. I've added a margin of 10 pixel to everything, that is both top and bottom and left and right. But I don't know if I want it to have on left and right as well. I only just want it to have for top and bottom. For left and right is not so necessary. But regardless, we still have it looking good. Now the next thing for us to do is to go back to the project and work on some other important parts of this project. And this particular discipline and this one is not looking like this, is it? Okay, it is actually. So I'm just going to leave it at this, and I'll work on the other the other part. So now it's time for us to work on this other part here. And here we have our global campuses and we have some images. So I'm going to go back to my HTML, and instead of saying global campuses here, I would call it, let me just say the kind of people we accept, right? Maybe you have an MSc or a BSc or a PhD. So in order for me to do that, I am going to come back and create another session because that's the appropriate thing to do. So I'll come back to my HTML here. I create a new session. And in this session, I'm going to create an H1 here and a paragraph. So I have my H1. And my H1 is going to be, instead of our, of say degrees, we accept. Just to clone this, not necessarily the exact thing. And we also have a paragraph which I'm going to use I'm going to use lorem ipsum for that. So I go back again, lorem, and I'm just going to delete some part of this lorem because I don't need it. So I'll delete all of this and add a closing tag. So this is it. Let's go back to what we are working on and let's see. Okay, so we have that. Now it's time for us to, we need to style that particular session. So let's give it a class and let's call this degrees because that's how we can be able to target it and style it since we have multiple sessions. So I'm going to call up a class and I'll call this degrees. Okay. So going back to my CSS, I want to call up this dot degrees. I want to call up this dot degrees, and let me see what I have. So what I'm going to do is, instead of me just typing out and repeating a lot of things, I want it to just be the same way we have this discipline we accept. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go to this session where we had discipline. Okay, this spelling of discipline is wrong. So I'm going to come here to my CSS, and this particular discipline, I'll just copy everything here and I'll paste it here so it can be the same. Okay, so this is good. Now since we've done this, we want to be able to do all of this, right? So what we're going to do is to go back to our HTML because that is exactly where we can be able to do that. So going back to my HTML now, I'm also going to call up a div because we have three. We have three of these, so we need to put it in a div. So what I'm going to do is like the exact same thing I did earlier, where I have a div here. I called up discipline row, then I have three classes that contained everything. So I'm going to call up degrees row. So I'm just going to do this, call up a div, and I give it a class. I call up this class is going to be, I call it degrees row, and inside this class I'm going to add the image. So I don't need to put the image in any div again. So I'm just going to call up this image tag, and it's a self-closing tag, and I want to add the source. All my images are in the photos, so I'm going to add bachelor, and let's see what we have afterwards. Okay, so this is a bachelor and this is not looking bad. I'm just going to repeat it for everything, and this way I'm going to, okay, from what I observe here, theirs is having another, I don't know if it's necessary for me to do all of this because I don't know if I want to be if I want us to go through this, but let's see how far we can go with this. Let's add the 3 images and let's continue with what we have. So since I have the class degree, I have the photo. Now what I can do is we can definitely add it. So let's just add another div here and let's call this div, and let's give it a class of layer so we can be able to style what we have there. Right, so inside this div we're going to have a h3 as well. So this h3 is now going to be the name. So we have bachelor. I'll just keep it in cap lock. Since we have it this way, and I'm supposed to add a div right after the row, which is supposed to be the degree colon. So we have this div here. Copy the closing tag here. I cut it and I'll put it here. Paste it. So I give this a class and I'll call it degrees row. Rather, degrees colon. So I can now delete all of this. So we have this div which contains the image, and it contains this other div that is closing here. So what I can now do is to copy all this and paste. I'm going to copy this and I'll paste it, and I'll paste it again. Then I can change the image if I want to. So we have these 3. Now this is looking good. So since we've done this, now it's time for us to style it. But before I do that, I'm just going to change the image. So bachelor's, photos, then I have master's. If I don't have any other photo again, I can use. So these photos here, do I have okay, I'll still use the bachelor's still. So this is, I've changed bachelor, master's. This is bachelor. I'll just change the text here to be doctorate, and I'll change this one to be master's. So this is it. Now it's time for us to go to our CSS and let's style this accordingly, right? So I really want to be sure this particular div, where is it closing? Okay, now this other div, where is it closing? This other div, and this particular div. Okay, so everything is looking good. Everything is looking great now. And yeah, so I just want to take a good look at this very well before I proceed. Okay, so this is it. Now I go back to my website. The CSS. Now it's time for me to style this other part of the website. So let me first of all style the row just like this and give it a display of flex, and because that's exactly what I need to do first since I've been able to do this. So I'm just going to call up the degrees row, I'm going to give it a display of flex, Let's see what we have. Okay, let's keep styling. I'm going to then give it a margin top, just like the way I did above, 5%. And then I will give it a justify, and I want it to be space between. Okay. Do we have any changes? Yes, because the images are large. Anyways, let's work on the layers that we've added, and let's see what we have. So for the individual, this is just for the row. So let's work on the degrees. Okay, now I see where the issue is. It's degrees, not degree. Exactly. So because it ought to at least display as a flex. Yes, so degrees. So this is it. Now let me work on the individual column. So I'll have degrees, then code. What I'm going to do with this is simple. I'm going to give it a flex basis as well, so it can also be, it won't be together like this. So I give it a flex basis of 30%. Let's see if this makes any difference. Then I'll add a border radius, 10 pixel. Then I had a margin, 2 pixel. Then I would also add a position, relative. Then I'll add overflow to be hidden. So let's see what we have. Okay, now it's beginning to look good, except that the images are not full. So what I'm going to do to this is I'm going to add a border, or rather a box sizing the way I added for the other one, which is going to be border box. So I think, okay, I need to style the image. I think the image is too large. That's why it's not responsive. So what I'm going to do is to go back to this image. I'll call up the degrees O, and I will style the image. For the image, I want the width to be 100%, so it will fit into the container I've set for it. Perfect. So since I've added sized the image to fit into the container I've added, I can now even give the image a border. I've added the border radius to this, so I don't need to add to the image. And I want it to be this way. Now we can as well leave it like this, but because I want us to style it the way we have this, although for me, I don't know if I want us to go through this route again, but literally, let me see how we can do that. Okay, so in order for us to target the layer, what we are going to do is this. We are going to call up that layer that we've added, and we're going to add a background. Okay, let me comment this out so that I can explain better. So the reason why I even have this position relative overflow hidden in the first place is because I want to work on the layer. So I'm just going to put this back. And for the layer now, I want a background of this. Okay, so it's on the bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. Remember, I already added it in my HTML. So this is the layer, right? And we have this. So going back, I would also add a height of 100%. So it should take the entire height of the container. Let's see. Let me add the width. In CSS, there's a lot of try and error. Okay, it's not responsive yet. Let me add a position. Absolute. We have a top 0. And we have a left 0. Okay, so it's looking good, except that it should be transparent. It should be transparent for now. When I hover around it is when it should have this. So for now it should be background transparent. So this is better. Now so my layer, over, then I can now have this background, this color. So when I over, this is what we have. It's still not similar to this, so we're working towards it. So since we have this, now we want to, I want to work on the H3, which is the bachelor, so it can be in the center. And also when I hover around it, so let's just keep working. A width of 100%, the font weight 500. Let's make the color to be white. And let's make the font size 26 pixels. Let's make the position absolute. Let's make the left 50%. Transform. So it can stay in the center. Had the H3 and we've been able to add the over H3. So this is a class. We want the layer to have an over for the H3. So by the time there's an over, the H3 is going to be visible and it's going to be positioned 50% from the bottom. And we have the layer for the H3 without the over. We have the color to be white. We have the font weight to be this and all of this. So what was going to happen that the moment there's an over, these properties together with this one above is going to reflect. So let me come here. You can see, right? So I decided to change the color because I went back to this and I saw that it's a light color. So I decided to use the RGB for this and I changed the color. So we have this color which is lighter and now it makes it visible. So this is just the code we used for that. We had the layer, and I think from the layer down to this point is very explanatory. This dot layer h3 is only for the heading h3, and this is for the over, when we around the h3. So this is what's going to come out. So we're done with this. Now let's focus on the other part of this project. So we have our facilities, and we also have this what our student says. So for our own project, we're going to use let's change it to be something that we can use. So we're going to create another session here. Just right after this, we're going to create a new session like we've been doing from the beginning. So once you create this session, and let's give this session a class. Let's call it facilities. Really, let's just call it facilities or amenities. Maybe just let's say amenities. So having these amenities inside this, it's similar to what we have earlier on. So what we are going to do is to create a div, and inside this div we're going to have the amenities row. We're going to give this a class, and we're going to have the amenities row, because this is the class we are going to set a display flex that is going to contain each of these cards here. So we have this card, and this card. Now this particular card, now let's call it let's create another div for this, and let's call this amenities colon. So we have the class, call up a class, and we call this. So it's inside this amenities call here. We're going to have the image, then we're also going to have the h1, and we're going to have the paragraph. So this, let's call up the image, and we have the photos. Let's use hostel, and let's call up h2 for this, since we're going to call up h2, and we can just name ours hostel rather than using I think we can just name it hostel basically. So let's just name this hostel, since the photo is hostel. So let's name this hostel. I think this, let's see what we have. Okay, this is good, but it seems this h2 is big. Let's change it to h3 instead then. So let's change this to h3, and we have this. So back to what we have here. We have a paragraph, and we're going to use lorem ipsum for that. So we're going to use this lorem ipsum. We're going to use the lorem, and just something really small, not so much. So I'm going to just delete it from this place. I'll delete it from here. I'm just going to delete it from here. Okay, where there's a full stop here is better. Okay, so this is better, and I will duplicate this. Let me come back to what we are working on. So this is it. Then I will duplicate this, and I will just change the image. So I'm going to duplicate all the way from the amenities cool. So I'm duplicating all the way from this place. So let's see. Okay, so we have these three here. So what I'm going to do is to change the image and I will change the H3. So we have photos and we have hostel, I think industry. So I'm just going to change this to, no, not industry actually. I used this is not the image for it. Photos, then I will just change this to laboratory, and I'll put laboratory here, and I'll change this to graduation. So I'm just going to put graduation. We can have those images. Perfect. So once we are done with this, we go back to our CSS and we'll call up the class for that session, which is dot amenities. So we have amenities. So I don't need to have to write that from the beginning. I'm just going to go to one of my classes here and I'll copy what I have, just like I've been doing earlier. So I'm just going to paste this. Once this is pasted, I can now see this. But before then, before all of the images and everything, there is this our amenities and this paragraph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my HTML and I'm going to have to fix this somewhere. So we have amenities. Okay, it's there. Actually, it's written already. But we have hostel, laboratories, graduation. Definitely, I have my session here. I have my div. Then I have this. Okay, so it's not there. It's actually not there. I went straight to the H3 and the paragraph while I omitted this, our facilities. So what I'm going to do is come back here and I'm just going to come to the amenities here and I will create another heading, which I'm going to use heading 1, because we've been using heading 1 from the beginning for all of these places. So I'm just going to use H1 and I'll call this our amenities, and then I'm going to create another paragraph which I'm just going to use lorem ipsum for. So we have this, so this is better. Now that this is sorted out, I'm going to come back to my CSS and it's time for us to style these amenities. So having done this, I've added padding to this. All I'm just going to do next is to call up my amenities role, because that's where we are working on now. So it's for me to call up my amenities role, and we've actually been doing that from the beginning. It's the same as what we have in the previous for all the roles, but I'll call this amenities role, and then I would also copy what I already have, which is okay, it's the same as, let me go back to my HTML. I think I'm making a mistake somewhere. So all right, so the issue is this is amenities row, right? There's a duplicate here, so I'm just going to have to remove one of these from my HTML. I don't know if I'm making sense. Let me just compare it to what I have. I have the degrees and I have the degrees row. So in my previous CSS here, I also have the degrees, then I have the degrees row. So in my amenities row, I'm supposed to just copy what I also have here because I want it to be display and I want it to be margin top and all of those. So this amenities row, I'll paste this and let's see what we have. Now it's looking good, except that these images are large. So I'm just going to call up, just like what I did here again. I'm just going to call up my amenities row and the image there. So I'm just going to enter this dot amenities row, then the image. I want the width to be this, and possibly I don't need the border radius, so I'm just going to give it a width of 100%. Okay, so this is looking good. Now I'm going to have to start to call up the individual column, that is this amenities column. So I'm back here, dot amenities now I can start to edit or style this individually. So from this now, it's just basically what we've been doing from the beginning. So what I'm going to do here is to give it a margin top, is to give it a margin bottom, and just align the text basically because it's already looking good, and probably give it a flex or a border box. So I can give it a flex basis as well, and I can give it a flex basis of 30%, just like I've been doing earlier. Okay, so this is better. I can give it a margin button, 10px, and I give it a text align to the left. Okay, I think it's not as wide as, because it ought to be wide starting from here. So I'm going to go back to my HTML, and I want to see the width here is for the amenities. So I'm going to come back here to check for this session. So for this session, I already set it to be 80% auto, and okay, so everything is looking normal except that they are quite small. So I'm trying to figure out what I need to change. So I'm just going to, okay, possibly let me add a border. Let me add a border sizing to be certain, which is a box sizing rather, and I want it to be border box. It's still relatively small, and okay, so this flex basis, I want the I'm trying to figure out what the issue could be. I think I'm going to have to increase this flex basis, so I'm just going to give it 35%. Okay, let me give it 40. The image size, I'm assuming, but I'm just going to check that later on. So I'm just going to add the border radius to this. I have 20 pixels, so it's really kind of similar to what we have, except that it's not as large as this. So we need to style the H3. Then we are going to call on the amenities. Cool. And we have the H3. Now for the H3, I want us to give it maybe a margin top because it's too close to the air there. So we have a margin top. I have a margin top. Let's give it 16. Let's give it a margin bottom as well. And we can add 15 pixels. So let's give it, that's enough. This looks good. It's similar to what we have, and I just want to check out something. Okay. I literally enhanced the width to be 100%. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna try 90. It's still small. So let's have this at 100 and see. So we have the width of this session at 100%. Okay. I really want to just go into my code and look at everything. Okay, let me check my HTML again. We have this whole session closing down there, and I have this whole session for the degree. Okay, I can't find the closing tag for this. I suspect this is probably why we have that issue. So I'm just going to come here and I'll pull up the closing tag for this. Exactly. So now I know why we had that issue. It's because I didn't have a closing tag for the degrees. I literally just fixed that now. So I'm going to go back to leave the width of my amenities session to be at 80%. Now it looks better. So what happened was I had my HTML tag. The closing tag for my degrees for the session wasn't there. I just figured it out, and I was able to close that session and begin this session. So the 80% width is now reflecting. So we have this. Now what's left is for us to work on the testimonials, what our student says. It's basically the same thing. That's why this example is really a very simple kind of example to use. So we're going to go to another section here, and this section here is going to be for the testimonials, just like we have it there. And we're going to give it a class. We call it testimonials. Inside this class, we're going to have this. But before then, we are going to have an H1. And H1 is what our student says. So what our employees says, what our employees says. So we're going to have another P tag. I'm just going to copy what we have here. I'm just going to copy what we have and I'll paste it here. And that's it. So let me see. Okay. Now I'm going to break, or even if I don't break it, I'm going to style this in my CSS, and I'll call up this particular section here, which is testimonials. and I'll give it a confined width and imagine. So dot testimonials. I'm just going to copy this as usual. Text align center, padding. Now I'll put this here. So once this is there, it's going to be confined to the 80% width of the screen. Now I'm going to go back to my HTML, and what people say, I'm going to have to do this here. So I'm going to put this frame, and the way to do that is simple. Now if you observe, this is a little bit tricky because we have like a div and we have another div. Like these two div, the one containing the image and the one containing the text, they are separate divs. So this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to let me just give a brief explanation before I go into how it's going to be done. I'm going to have these two divs. So one is going to contain the image and one is going to be the div containing the text, as well as the star, which is, that's the way I'm going to do it. So we're just going to come up to the first div, which is this div. So this first div is where I'm going to add I'm going to give this div a class of the row. So this is going to be a class of testimonial row. Right? So inside this div, I'm now going to also have a div. And this other div is going to have its own class as well of the testimonial colon, right? And inside this colon is, of course, everything is going to be. But because I'm going to have a display for inside this, for this particular card, in the sense that I'm going to have an image separately, having then another, I'm going to have another div. So this image is this image. Okay, so we don't have images for users, and I'm just going to go to add the images for the users, and I would put that later on. But before then, I want to work on this to get to know how it's going to be done. So I'm going to do another div here. And it's in this div, I'm going to add a paragraph, and I'm going to use the lorem, and I'm also going to add another h3, but I need this thing to come down here. I need this one to also come down here. I need this to also come down here. Okay, so this can be seen. Then I'm also going to call up the h3, and I will give this name Billy, and I would now, since I already added the fonts to the header, I can now go and look for the font in my font icon. So with this here, I think we're getting closer to this. But let me add the images so we can get back to what we're doing. My photo folder, so I can now call up the image here. User 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this div down to okay, I'm going to copy from here. Ouch. So we have it ending here. Okay, this is where I'm copying it from. I'm going to copy this. Okay, so let's see what we have. Okay, so this is looking good. I'm just going to work on this, then I'll come back to edit the images. So since we have all of this, we're going to go to our CSS and we're going to have to style it. Now, where do we start our styling from? We've been able to style the testimonials. Now we need to style the testimonial column first before we can style the testimonial row, because of course the testimonial row is going to be in a flex, but we need to be able to style that testimonial column because we're also going to give it a display, right? So what we need to do is to first of all come to our CSS and let's call up our testimonial column. For the testimonial column, I'm going to give it a display of flex. And let's see what we have. Okay, so it's looking like this. Yes. So since the display of flex, that is the image and the second and the other div, that is this image here and this div, they're going to be on a flex. So after doing that, I'm going to give this a flex basis of, let me give it a flex basis of 27. Let's see what we have. Okay, and I'm going to give this a border radius. I'm going to give this a margin button. I'm going to size the image. I'm going to give it a confine height and I will give it 40 pixels. So I want it to be really small. Okay. Alright. And since I've given it a confine height, I'm going to give it a border radius as well. I'm going to give it a margin on the left. Okay. This border radius. Now I'm definitely going to call up the testimonial row. So I can style the testimonial row. For the testimonial row, I'm going to give it a display of flex. Then I'm going to give it, okay, let's see what we have now. This looks good. It's coming out really well. Since I've given it a display, let me give it a margin. Margin top. Let me also just give this justify content so we can add space in between. Okay. Let me give it a I'm supposed to give it a box sizing, a border box, and now let's see what we have. Okay. Let me give it a flex basis. We need it to have some space in between, and currently we don't have any space in between, so we're just going to go back to our code. We're going to take another look at it. Okay, I'm giving this testimonial row, just like the amenities row, margin justify, and this should be enough to give me a space. So flex basis, let me see, still not having that space. Okay, I need to actually look into this to know exactly why we do not have that space. So while we are trying to figure that out, let me go to my font awesome and get all of those icons, awesome icons rather, and get the icons for star so I can copy it and put in my code. So I'm just going to search for star, and this is the star I'm looking for. So this is the code. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put this in my HTML just directly after this. I'll paste this and I'll remove this area show. So let's see if it's currently there. Okay, so we have it here. Now I'm going to put this 5 times. I'm going to copy this and paste it 5 times. So since it's done, I'm just going to copy this and put in the other part of my code. So I'll copy and I'll paste this everywhere. I would also change the image to be the image, and I will also change the name. I'm just going to change this color and work on the H3, and I think that's what is left once we do that. So let's just continue with what we're doing. We'll go back to our CSS and we're going to call up the testimonial. and we're going to call up H3. So testimonial poll, and we're going to have an H3. So in this H3, we're going to give it a margin top. We're going to give it a margin top, and we're also going to give it text align. So for this margin top, let's give it 15 pixel. Let's give it text align to the left. And so with this, we are almost done. But let's see what we currently have. Okay. Okay, so this is there, except I really am looking for the okay. I don't know if it worked. Okay, it worked actually. So we have a margin top. Now for the paragraph, do we need to style the paragraph? For the paragraph, you just want to text align is already on the left. Everything concerning the paragraph is done. What is left for us to style is the icon. So I'm going to, I think H3 isn't what I used in my HTML. Okay, it's actually H3. But why is it that bold? Okay, it's H3. Okay, it's time for us to start the icon, and we have a class of FA. So we're just going to call up the testimonials. We're going to call up this icon, and we're going to call up the we're going to give it a color because that's all we need to style here. We're going to give it a color of this. Okay, so this is looking good, and I think okay, so we have this left. Now let's go to our HTML in order for us to style this, and let's give it another session. We're going to call this session a CTA session. So in this session, what we are going to do, I want to see, we just have an image here, and we have a like an H1 and a button. That's pretty what is in this session. So I'm going to call up this session, and I'll give it a class. We have a session here, and I'll give this a class of CTA. And in this session, we're going to have H1, we're going to have a button, and we're going to have the image. But this image is going to be in the CSS because it's like a background image. So basically, what we need to do is just call up our H1, and we say submit your applications, submit your applications for posting for positions. Yeah. So once we're done, we're going to also use an anchor tag for the button, and we're going to call this contact us. So contact us, that's pretty much of what is here. So we're going to give it href. Currently is leaving nowhere, so we're going to put hash. And this brings us to the end of this session. So let's go start this CTA session in our CSS before we go back to the HTML. So back to the CSS, we're going to call up our CTA, and we're going to give this a background image. Okay, not a background filter. We're going to give this a background image. let me just URL any image whatsoever of the photos. Let me just use the laboratory, and that's fine. But we are also going to have a gradient. So since we're also going to have a gradient, and we're using the same laboratory, I'm just going to come to the top here, and I will copy this here. And I will just paste it. Okay, so this is it. Now, since we've been able to add that, next thing is for us to add, for the CTA as well, we can also add a margin. And we're going to add a width, so it can conform to the 80% of the screen size we've been using all along. Okay, and then we are going to background position. We have this to be center. Then we have a background size. I want this to be cover. And I'm going to give it a border radius. And we're also going to give it text align. I want the text to be centered, and I want it to have a padding for the left and right. I want it to have a padding of 100 pixel, and for top and bottom 0. So let's see. Okay, this is looking good. So we gave it this, and what we need to do is to style this heading and to style this contact us button. So come back to your HTML and we can style this. So it's an H1. So what we do is .cta H1, and we give it a color. We want it to be white. Then we have a margin button, so there can be some space between that and the contact us button. And we also want a padding of 0, though it may not be necessary. So this is looking good. Now let's work on the contact us. So for the CTA, for the contact us, let's come to, we have just contact us. That is the anchor tag. We didn't give it a class, or we want to give it a class. Call it CTA button. I think we should give it a class. And if we give it a class, we can be able to call it the CTA button, or we can also even give it a class of button, since it's the same as that other button. So all the style will apply to it. So I'm just going to give this a class here, right? And I'll name the class button. Just okay. Okay, so everything applies, and now we are almost done with this product, or we are almost done with this project. So we go to the next, which is the footer section, and then we are done. So done with this session. Let's open another session, call this a footer, and in this footer we have an opening and closing, and we're going to call up an H. We're going to call up H4 because we want to be able to put this about us. So we don't want it to be so large. So I'll use H4 for this, and I'll call this about us. And this is a footer. You can give it a class, and I'll call it footer as well. So I can target that class. So afterwards, I'm going to also add the paragraph. Right now, I'm just going to copy this content here. And I'll paste it here. So once this is done, I will then add the icons. So let's just style this without the icons, and let's see what we have. For our company website, this is what we have. So let's go to our CSS, call up this footer, and give it a margin. What we need to do is copy from what we've been using from the beginning, which is the text align, padding, and I just paste this here. So once this is done, yes, so it looks similar. Now I'm going to go back to my HTML and I want to put in these icons. But for me to get the icon, I need icon for Facebook, for Twitter, for LinkedIn, and for Snapchat. All I'm going to just type in here is, I'll go back to the search and I'll search for Facebook. So once I get my Facebook, once I get which icon, okay, F, I'll just use this one. So once I get this, I'll copy this and I place this in my code. Copy HTML. I will put this in my code, but I want to put this in a div so that I can be able to style it as well. Right, so I'll give this a div and I'll call it I give it a class. I think I'll just call it icons. And I'll call this icons, and I can then paste this inside. So I'll delete this and I'll copy this and I'll duplicate it. So instead of Facebook, I will put Twitter. I'll paste again. Instead of Facebook again, I will put LinkedIn, Instagram, and Instagram and Snapchat. Instagram, and I'll have this here to be Snapchat. I can as well search for it and copy and paste, but it's the same format, so I think this will help. Now I can see we have this. So this is what we have for the footer, and we also have one more thing here, which is the made with love Amoke. So what I'm going to do is, outside this div, I'll put another paragraph and I'll type the made with love. I'll put my name here. So instead of this love, we're going to put an icon, right? So I'm just going to come to the font awesome, and when I get to this, I will type hat. I will search for the hat, this particular hat, and I'll copy this and place in my code. Okay, so we are almost done. All we need to do is go to our CSS and begin to style this. So for our about and paragraph and everything, I'm going to go to my CSS. I've called up the footer class. What's left for me to style here will be the H1. I want to style the H1, and then I also want to style the H. I also want to style the icons. So I'm just going to come here and I would call the footer H4. Is it H1 or H4? I say it's H4. So I'll call H4, and I have the text align to the center. Okay, so that's it. Then I need to style the icons. I need to style these icons. I want to give them a margin top, and I also want to give them some other things. So I'm just going to call up the icons because I gave them a class in a div called icons or icon. So I have dot icon dot fa. The reason why I had to use dot icon dot fa is because not necessary though. I might not use the dot icon dot fa because I probably just wanted to target this particular class as well. That's the reason why I added the dot fa. So dot icon dot fa, that is the to class, and I'm going to add a color. This. So let's see. The color has been added. I want to add a padding. I want to add a padding of 18 pixel and 0. Then I'll add a margin because it's very important to add a margin. So let's see what we have. This looks good. So since we're done with the icons, we can now color this particular class here. So I go to my HTML, and the class here is also FA. So I'm just going to call it the class FA Art, just exactly the way it is, and I will style it giving that color. So I'll copy this, go back to my CSS, and I'll paste this. Let's put a dot. So I give it a color, and we have this. So this is absolutely what. Okay. So the color is not effective. It's an error somewhere. So we have this. Still not effective. Let me go to my HTML. So we have FA Art. FA Art. Okay. Trying to see what the issue is. Okay. Yes. Come back to my HTML. Um, I'm actually calling the exact same thing, so I really don't know why it's not running. So I'm just going to delete this and type it again. Oh, okay. Maybe it's let's give this a color of red. So it's not, it didn't even reflect, so I don't know why that's like that. But we've come to the end of this. I'm just going to put this on a full screen and let's see what we've worked on. We've been able to replicate that website, and this is what we have, and this is just absolutely gorgeous. And all right, at this stage, I'm just going to say thank you for keeping in touch. We're done with vanilla CSS and we'll have to go to CSS framework. So I'm going to have to touch up on CSS framework. I'm going to focus on Bootstrap and Tailwind CSS. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to also practice, and I'm going to also make some videos, like a practice along with me video like this. Thank you for staying till the end. If you like this content, do well to subscribe and tell your friends about it. Bring them to my channel so they can also begin to learn using my roadmap.